What is your role in this? How did you get involved?
Yeah, so I work at a think tank called New Consensus, and so...
Ongoing political discourse about the Green New Deal is misleading in two important respects. One, it was not written by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In short, this is a good thing because that means it's not her fault. Two, there's a lively debate about whether or not this law would cost $10 trillion or $100 billion, whether or not the astronomical sums people are attaching to it as estimates could be justified. And the amount this bill would cost the United States of America is zero. Because legally, this bill does absolutely nothing aside from expressing a sentiment. If you haven't formally studied political science, this may surprise you, but actually in the United States, many of the most important laws have only expressed a sentiment. Well, important if you're someone like me who cares about human rights and progress of civilization. In 2009, the United States passed a law regretting the conquest, oppression, enslavement, and genocide of the indigenous peoples. Means a lot to me. It's just a sentiment. There's absolutely nothing about that law that's enforced. It has no consequences. It didn't cost the taxpayer any more than the cost of printing it on paper. Bill Clinton very memorably passed a law, a federal law that's on the books, apologizing for the unethical way in which the United States annexed the island of Hawaii. It's a very complex, convoluted episode of history that can't easily be summed up as conquest or genocide. Nevertheless, very immoral, regrettable thing. And that law states that the government of the United States of America regrets it. It is an apology expressed in law. Didn't cost the taxpayers $1. It's just a sentiment. It is mind-blowing that this debate is going on with all sides apparently not recognizing that the Green New Deal is absolutely nothing more than an expression of sentiment. And it's possible that the authors of the Green New Deal, who are, again, not A.O.C. herself, that they're unaware of this because they are rank amateurs. Now, I understand you won't take my word for it, so here is a quick screenshot from the New York Times. Highlighted there in pinkish red, the resolution is non-binding. So even if Congress approves it, nothing in the proposal would become law.
There is a real hunger for young people, people of color, to be activists. But once it moves out of that space, everyone's like, okay, now the real adults will come and fix it, which usually means get out, here are the white men.
Now, if you read the bill in American politics, you say something is a bill before it's been passed as a law. If you read it carefully, what it is actually expressing is that the United States recognizes certain things. That's just like Bill Clinton passing a law saying the United States recognizes the terrible suffering of the indigenous people or the native people of Hawaii. Nothing wrong with that. But it's very false and misleading to suggest that this would cost $10 trillion, $10 billion, or even $10 million. This is absolutely nothing more than a contest over what we in the political science trade call motherhood statements. Now, where does that phrase come from? It comes from the tendency of some politicians at some point in the past to get up on stage and give speeches extolling the importance of motherhood, reaching out to the audience and saying, you know what really makes America great is the mothers. It's, where would we be today without motherhood? Speechifying on something where there is really nothing to be won and nothing to be lost, where there are no consequences for moral grandstanding. That is precisely what the Green New Deal is. Now, the main discovery I made in researching for this video was that it's quite false to accuse A.O.C. of having paid a private research group to write this on her behalf. That was my initial concern, and put up some screenshots here. Various people, some left-wing, some right-wing, some just concerned observers, have suggested that there is a moral quandary surrounding who got paid, how, and why to write the Green New Deal. Now, point one, even if it were true that A.O.C. paid a consultancy firm to write this law for her, in American politics, that wouldn't just be legal, that would be normal. If someone like myself gets elected and I pay a lawyer to help me write something in correct legalese, there's nothing remarkable about that. Almost every major politician in the last 100 years in the United States has paid someone to write his or her speeches for them. Quite often other people write legislation, whether in broad outline or in detail or both.
Have y'all heard of the Sunrise Movement? Kind of. So they're a youth movement that is like doing the organizing, the people power part of it. There's another org called Justice Democrats that essentially works with electeds and candidates to do it. And then New Consensus, we develop the policy for the Green New Deal.
Now, maybe that should be illegal. Maybe there should be illegal. You could have a very interesting referendum or constitutional resolution that maybe politicians should have to write their own speeches and write their own laws. But currently in the United States, nobody expects that, and that's normal. So to start with, that controversy is a bit of a tempest in a teapot. But what I really discovered doing the research for this video is that the direction of the association there is 180 degrees wrong. The author of the Green New Deal, whose fingerprints are all over it in terms of its specific wording, its tone, its tenor, everything about this, is a woman named Rhiana Gunn-Wright. And mysteriously, she suddenly has been getting less and less positive press from her own colleagues because she took the dramatic step of endorsing Elizabeth Warren, not Bernie Sanders, whereas obviously AOC endorsed Bernie Sanders in recent Democrat Party competition for who might run for the next president of the United States. But notice, up until quite recently, Rhiana Gunn-Wright's name has very much been front and center as the face of and the author of the Green New Deal. And if you look up the interviews she gave, it's very clear that what really happened was this Green New Deal pre-existed the political phenomenon of AOC rising to power. So, without getting into details, New Consensus is this somewhat questionable political consultancy firm that is now credited as authoring the Green New Deal and as employing Rhiana Gunn-Wright to author the Green New Deal. However, the authors at New Consensus, the Sunrise Movement, and the Justice Democrat Organization, they all existed prior to and quite independent from AOC and her meteoric rise to both power and fame. So it's not the case that this was AOC's idea. It's not the case that she authored it. It's not the case that she hired this firm, New Consensus, to write it for her. Those are false but plausible assumptions. I understand why people, whether they're left-wing, right-wing, moderate, I understand why people would assume that given the role AOC has today in being, the public face for announcing, propounding the Green New Deal. But it really had nothing to do with her. And from my perspective, that is a very good thing. I am profoundly committed to ecology. If you were going to write this law that calls for a 100% elimination of the use of fossil fuels in our society. Let me tell you something. We could eliminate tobacco 100%. People can stop smoking. We could eliminate alcohol as a beverage 100%. We could eliminate the eating of meat, the drinking of dairy milk. We could eliminate all those things 100%. You know what's really hard to do? It's really hard to replace all of the 18-wheel trucks that the United States of America relies on with some kind of truck that doesn't burn any fuel at all. You know what's really hard to do is to go city by city, coast to coast, and find out where people's electricity comes from and generate all of that electricity with zero emissions, right? I'm sorry, but if you want to use the word impossible as opposed to possible, the fantasy of a vegan utopia, it's actually much more possible and attainable than any of the dreams that are set down in writing in the Green New Deal, all right? The only problem with having a society that consumes zero meat is that people are addicted to meat. It's the same problem with having a society that smokes zero cigarettes, all right? But I am profoundly committed to ecology. I was interested and committed to environmentalism and ecology long before I became vegan. It was really as a consequence of that. You know, you have to take responsibility for your own actions in this life and recognize the exponential difference it makes, the difference you can make by being vegan personally, by being a part of the vegan movement. All right? Nevertheless, when I look at this law, the first thing that was obvious to me is that the people who wrote it were amateurs. And when I looked at the rhetoric that's used to sell this law to the public, it was very, very clear to me that these people are painfully ignorant in both politics and the science of economics. So you may have noticed A.O.C. herself, Bernie Sanders himself, everyone who is following the playbook set down by Rhiana Gunn-Wright and Damon Drummer, they all repeat this rhetoric about World War II, that all the United States needs to do is to be willing to get itself into debt to the same levels that happened during World War II, show the same commitment that the United States had to making thousands of aircraft and thousands of tanks to defeat the Nazis in World War II, and then this problem can be overcome. And they present this without even the merest back-of-the-envelope calculation showing that, for example, you can go city by city and replace all the 18-wheel trucks and replace all of the power plants, that's possible, that achieving this 100% goal is possible at any price, or what that price would be, or how that compares to building a bunch of tanks and airplanes. Well, there's no calculus. It's just a moral assertion that if the United States were as committed as they were to World War II and willing to go into debt to the same level they were in World War II, I got bad news for you. Right now, the United States is in debt to the same extent that you were during World War II. And that's why it's mind-blowing to me that all these people, they kind of put on these performances time and time again, but they never actually show you the charts. They never show you numbers. They never do the math, right? If you look up the current United States GDP to federal debt ratio, you're above 105, 106. It's only going to get worse under Donald Trump. The absolute pinnacle of indebtedness in World War II, you're talking about 112.7%. So you're already within a rounding error of being as close to bankruptcy, as deeply in debt as you were in World War II. And as you know, there's no particular emergency in the United States of America. You're already at the breaking point without trying to, say, conquer Western Europe, Japan, etc. You're not taking on any such, well, you know, you've had a few wars in the last 10 or 20 years, but in case you weren't paying attention, you were already now in a situation just as dire and desperate as you were economically and politically in the United States of America at the peak of your debt crisis created by World War II. So this is the rhetoric. And it's really worth pointing out the rhetoric already is broken. Now, when I said before, it's kind of natural and normal for someone like A.O.C. to pay for a scriptwriter, to pay for a researcher, to pay for a consultancy firm to draft legislation. That's what they're paying for. They're hoping that someone like Rhiana Gunn-Wright, with her impressive-sounding degree from the University of Oxford, they're hoping that someone like that is going to provide them with useful rhetoric of this kind. But Rhiana Gunn-Wright is a nincompoop. The people who were in charge of this particular, very newly created organization, New Consensus, all right, these were not people who were in any way qualified or prepared to make the move from popular street activism, just say agitation for politics, to actually writing legislation. And it was immediately strikingly obvious to me in reading the law itself, the bill itself, that these were people whose experience was entirely in making bold proclamations on Twitter, and they weren't even people who spent time reading legislation, let alone writing legislation. there is, in fact, a very good reason why street activists turn to kind of hardened, experienced professionals when they get involved with the legalese and the details of writing law that's actually actionable, that's actually implementable, that can make a difference in the real world, and that isn't just a declaration of good intentions, of pious wishes for the world to be a better place, that isn't just full of aspirations about racial equality and economic equality, which, by the way, if you haven't read it, that's most of what the Green New Deal is about. It reflects the personal philosophy of Rhiana Gunn-Wright and the thematic interests of Damon Drummer. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with ecology. All right? It's quite disappointing in that respect also. It certainly doesn't reflect years of careful research into how to, in an economically sustainable way, bring about a transformation or a transition from a gasoline-reliant economy to an economy that doesn't rely on gasoline. That would be the sort of area that someone like A.O.C. probably should pay a consultancy firm, probably should pay researchers, probably should pay experts to do millions of dollars of research. She probably should be paying people to provide her with, detailed guidelines and rhetoric and to draft laws for her. The problem is she paid the wrong people. The problem is she remained in bed with, by which I mean politically entangled with, a bunch of amateurs who just happen to be linked to the Justice Democrats and, the Sunrise Movement prior to her rise to fame. So the good news is, I don't blame A.O.C. for what's wrong with the Green New Deal. I hope for her this is going to be a learning moment that she moves on from, where she recognizes, if you pay peanuts, you work with monkeys. There's a reason why when you go to Washington, D.C., you stop dealing with people who are just well-intentioned amateurs who have some kind of street cred for organizing protests connected to the Justice Democrats, and you turn to and talk to people who really have some kind of profound depth of experience with the ways that politics work. It's really tragic that at the beginning of A.O.C.'s career, she came into power surrounded by a bunch of amateurs who, from my perspective, just sincerely did not know the difference between making bold proclamations on Twitter and writing legislation that's going to make a real difference in the real world. I'd love to say this is just the beginning of A.O.C.'s career and she's going to have lots of other opportunities to make a big difference in the world, but we don't know that. We don't know how many times she'll be able to hold up a bill and say that it's in the front page of every newspaper. We don't know how many times she's going to be able to capture the public interest or the sympathy of people within the elite, the institutional support, to really take an idea and run with it through the halls of power. So A.O.C., I hope this isn't your last chance. This was your first chance. And with all due respect, you blew it.